people have a very limited view of what asylum involves and what being a refugee involves. And of course, almost no refugee really wants to leave their home and will do everything they can to keep in touch with their families. And the idea that refugees are either economic migrants or they're fleeing a war is quite wide of the mark. There are many reasons why somebody may be seeking refuge in a third country. And the sort of propaganda which is put out by organisations like GBNews and The Express are, as I say, wide of the mark. But The Express and GBNews could not have been more delighted to hear the other day that a police chief was saying that asylum seekers were stopped at airports trying to go home for Christmas. The Border Force chief, Phil Douglas, had been talking to LBC about how Border Force conducts outbound checks during Christmas to check people. And he said, we do find a lot of people who have claimed asylum in this country and are heading back to their home countries for holidays, which he says obviously is not allowed. Well, if you're keeping people in limbo for years while you decide their fate, the rules become a little bit absurd. And we're living in a country which now proposes to separate families on economic grounds, again, in an absurdity. And simply to nod and say, well, other countries like Australia do it. I'm not completely convinced that Australia does do it in that form. And Australia has been dealing with its point-based asylum system for many years. This is being imposed in one fell swoop on Britain, and it's all being imposed one thing after another in a lump deal, and it seems extraordinarily unfair. Australia had time to get used to it, but as I say, I'm not even sure that the Australian system is quite as pernicious as our system. And the big difference between the Australian system, of course, and ours is that the Australian system works in some form. Our system clearly doesn't work, and it's uncertain to even to people who live here permanently. It's uncertain what the situation may be. So people who are only here looking for asylum, looking for help, may feel, well, we're not really getting help, and they need the warmth of their family. And who knows what they're going home to. So again, this blanket observation that asylum seekers are returning to their families for Christmas is perhaps wide of the mark. And also, remember, a lot of asylum seekers are very unlikely to be returning home for Christmas. Many of them are not Christians. Immigration, the immigration policies put forward by Suella Braverman and now James Cleverly are chaotic. And their attempt to distinguish between economic and genuine refugees is a spurious effort. Their attempt to distinguish between illegal and legal is about redefining what those terms are and then projecting that backwards so that they can say, oh, even Mrs. Thatcher agreed with us. Mrs. Thatcher was talking about a different definition of what was an illegal migrant. And the parliamentary process is necessary, but the parliamentary process must be working in tandem with the legal process, and to have the two at loggerheads is to demonstrate chaos. And if there's chaos in the system, in the bureaucratic system, then I don't suppose it should come as any surprise that there's chaos at the airports and chaos among those people who are applying for asylum. Humza Yousaf has also been speaking about Christmas, and he says that his family are facing an indescribable Christmas as they continue to suffer the horrors of war. Of course, as Gaza is still in the middle of conflict, and Netanyahu's IDF troops are still running riot across the Gaza Strip. And I don't think it really matters at this moment whether you're praying for peace or whether you're marching for peace. The peace can be the only objective. Demanding a ceasefire is one particular route towards peace, but I don't think that is really on the cards. And I think one has to look for a sustainable peace rather than a ceasefire. So if people want to march and if people want to pray, they should follow Humza Yousaf's initiative, because it is right to pray for peace in the Middle East, in the region, during Christmas. And he talks about his wife's parents trapped in Gaza, and how his wife's parents were visiting the wider family, and got out finally through the Rafah crossing after having spent 2 weeks of horror in a house with 100 people in it. It's he talks about his brother-in-law Mohammed, a doctor working in the Nasser hospital in the south of Gaza, with his wife and 4 children, and the youngest of those 4 children is just a few months old. He keeps in regular contact with his family, which I think is a positive thing. We spoke to our family yesterday, and the situation is beyond anything that I could ever imagine. It's indescribable, really. For all of us who will be celebrating with family, we'll be having a lot of good food to tuck into in Christmas. I really think it's important that we take a moment to reflect on the fact that those in Gaza and Ukraine are suffering. Many right across the world are suffering from the horrors of war. I'm afraid for them. The horrors of war will not take a break during the Christmas period. So my thought and my prayers are very much with the people of Gaza, and remembering, of course, that this is the region of Christ's birth, and they are suffering terribly and horrendously. So I'll be thinking of all those across the world who are suffering and praying for peace sooner rather than later. So when you're out this evening singing O Little Town of Bethlehem, that is in the middle of this crisis. And I think that needs to be borne in mind. O little town of Bethlehem, in the middle of this crisis. And the Crimean crisis, we've been there before. I've been teaching for the last few months. I've been teaching some English and looking particularly at poems which are again on the English syllabus, as they are most years. And one of the poems is The Charge of the Light Brigade, and I find it impossible not to see a connection between what was being described there in the middle of the 19th century and what is happening now. Our history is catching up with us, and we have to think of all those people who are caught in that history and in the reality of today.